Hello, welcome. My name is Zach Sheets, and if you are here for a community conversation about the tactics and ethics of grant seeking, you are in the right place. Else you found a Zoom link by accident, and you're welcome just the same to stick around and talk about the tactics and ethics of grant seeking. This is part of a broader series that we're doing here at Community Music Center of Boston, our Community Conversation series. This is the fourth and final chapter of a series of conversations we've had throughout the year, ranging from strategies for early childhood teaching to racial equity in the arts to disability advocacy, and something that we found has just been an excellent way for us to build our network and compare notes and talk about a lot of these issues that so many arts organizations and so many people in our field are working on. And so we're delighted to have you here. We are not moving to the next slide, so we're off to a rousing start. There we go. I've said all this, and today is June 3rd, so we're going to go on to the next slide. The one last thing to tell you before we do get started is for future use, we are recording my presentation. You may appear in the background just in that view of all the faces. If that's an issue for you, if you'd prefer not that, you can just turn off your camera and then we won't be able to see you. We're just recording my audio and video, but it just shows up in the background. So today we are going to go through a couple chapters here. Just start with a brief introduction and then get right into it. We're going to talk about some of the stages of the grant life cycle and about how to start a lot of those conversations. We're going to dive into a couple case studies and scenarios where my wonderful colleagues are going to join me, and we're actually going to play this out in practice and see how it works. And then we're going to talk a little bit about who we are and how we tell stories and how we advocate for ourselves, and think a little bit about who's in the room for a lot of these conversations and what are the ethics of participating in a lot of these conversations. And then we'll have some time for questions at the end. For questions, please do use Zoom's chat feature. We've got a lot of folks, so I'm not sure it's going to make sense for people to unmute themselves and talk, and that's just going to be kind of unwieldy. I am following along with the chat. You can either write me privately or just type a question in the group chat. And we can either clarify things as we're going if there's something I'm saying that's not clear, or we can save questions for the end. I will say, please feel free to take screenshots of the slides. I'm also happy to send them around to anyone afterwards. Some of our other community conversations have dug really deep into one particular topic and really in an analytical and thoughtful way covered every aspect of it. Today, we're going to cover a broader swath of things at a little bit quicker pace. A lot of these sort of norms and tactics and skills tend to be closely guarded secrets that people who work in philanthropy have. And in the interest of democratizing them, we're going to try to get through a bunch of different things that are kind of standard practices in the field. So I'm going to keep a pretty quick tempo, but please do stop me if something's unclear or confusing. And again, feel free to grab some screenshots or for us to share these back with you after the presentation. So let's begin. We are going to start today by looking at the way the conversation begins. Natural place to start. And backing up to some real basics here, let's just look at the three big kinds of giving we tend to have, right? Individual donations, foundation grants, and government grants. These tend to be three of the big pillars of contributed revenue in an organization. So individual donations, as we know, are when individual people who are well-connected and invested in community service get to know about nonprofits, get to know about the people who run them, and decide whether to make a financial gift. Foundation grants are when individual people who are typically well-connected and invested in community service get to know about nonprofits and the people who run them and decide whether to make a gift. Government grants, when people who are typically well-connected and invested in community service get to know about nonprofits, right? It's all the same stuff in a lot of ways because it's about people. There's some differences, right? The formal application process, a review panel, government grants might have certain standards or certain policies. Individuals might need to be stewarded or cultivated in a little bit of a different way. But at the end of the day, I think the thing people too often forget is that grants are a lot about people and a lot about relationships. So when we think about what goes into a grant, it really can't be achieved just by wordsmithing. It's an entire ecosystem. It's thinking about effective programs. It's thinking about having strong executive leadership. It's thinking about financial management. And it's about having a supportive and engaged board of directors, as we are very, very glad to have here at CMCB. And having an advocate in the room when you make a decision is really indispensable. Immediately, we get into an ethical question there, right? Who has a big enough network and a big enough set of professional contacts that they have ambassadors and advocates in the halls of power? But whenever possible, if you can navigate a conversation such that you do have trustees of a foundation or program officers of a foundation who can vouch for you, who know about you, and who know that you do good work, that goes such a long way towards standing out and helping your application come to the top of the pile. So wordsmithing is important, but that's largely not what we're going to talk about today. We're really going to talk about the other stages of the grant lifecycle, like how to gather information and how to build relationships, and in particular, how to work with program officers. So the staff at foundations, often called program officers or grant officers or program staff, are invaluable to navigating this process. They answer questions, they get to know grantees, they give technical support for the application, and most importantly, they really serve as the interface between the nonprofit and the trustees who are making the decisions. So even if they don't have decision-making power themselves, they're the ones who present your application to the people who do. And you can imagine immediately how important this is, right? The difference between someone who says, yeah, so this next application is from Community Music Center of Boston. I've met with them. I've been to a site visit. They're terrific, and I would really encourage you to read the proposal. Versus, this application is from Community Music Center of Boston. They applied out of the blue. We emailed. They were a little difficult. I don't really know them. Of course, one is much more likely to get funding than the other. And I think it's worth saying that basically every 5 or 6 figure grant I've ever secured at CMCB or any other organization where I've worked, it didn't start with a grant. It really started with a conversation. So that's what we're going to talk about in detail today. So what are the goals for this kind of conversation? The first thing is that you want to be able to present your work concisely. You want to be able to give an elevator pitch for what it is you're doing to help orient the person you're talking to and understand your work. As I was practicing with my colleagues who are going to join me for some of these case studies, one of the things we realized is that a lot of the people on this call, like them, are performers or teachers or people who work in and administer programs. And the reason they're really good at their job is because they're really detail-oriented and they really care about the nuts and bolts about how to do that work well. When you're making a pitch, you have to pull yourself up out of the weeds and really approach it from 30,000 feet. And that's a bit of a shift for people. And oftentimes something that doesn't necessarily come naturally and that takes a little bit of practice. But you have to remember, in a lot of cases, you're talking to someone who had a phone call with the Boston Symphony in the morning, a phone call with Harvard University in the afternoon. The next day is talking to a wildlife conservation agency. And then the next day is talking to Hyde Square Task Force, right? Or a youth development agency. So you have to be able to identify what it is that you do in a way that's very mutually accessible and well tailored to the people you're talking to. But then, critically, you want to pivot to be able to give the person you're talking to, this foundation representative, as much space to talk as possible. You want to hear from them. You want to make notes about everything they say, even down to the specific language they use, because that's language that you're going to want to mirror back in your proposal. You're going to want to copy down the kind of phrases they use. Do they care about the whole child? Do they care about youth development? Do they care about socio-emotional learning? And that's the kind of language that you should use as you're talking about what it is that you do. And as we all know, in-person or phone is really the best here. People can afford to be candid when there's no record of something in a way that they can't when everything's happening over email. So people tend to be very guarded in writing. A lot of people, particularly in my generation, we love email, we love texts. Doesn't work. It's got to be on the phone. The kind of insights you might want to have are should you apply for general support or for a specific program or a specific concert or series? How much money should you be asking for? What should you mention? What should you avoid? What rubric is used for evaluation? Think like a teacher. What's the rules for the assignment? What's the framework? How are you assessing the proposals? And how does the foundation define its values and its vision? we're often very socialized to have a scarcity mindset where we just want to get a proposal out the door and not bother anyone, and that's most likely to get people's attention. But it's just the other way around. These staff members are here to help you, to make sure that you put your best foot forward in a proposal, and they want to help you answer these questions. They want to get good proposals. So we'll start with some specific tactics here, and this is where the screenshotting may be particularly helpful if you want to copy these down for yourselves later. So an introduction is often, of course, a really good first impression. And since often these staff members are being approached by so many people all the time, they can try to sort of dismiss people quickly, even though they're nice people, lovely people, their time is valuable. So it's essential that you get right in the door with the key hook, right? I've reviewed the information on your website, and I'm wondering if you could share some time to talk with me. I have a few more questions. I've researched your history of generous giving with a lot of interest, and I think that we should probably chat about our programs. I'd love to be able to submit an application. If you have a personal connection, that's great. I learned about the foundation through our board member, Andrea Kaiser, who was the executive director of Bird Street for a long time, and she recommended us to you. We were wondering if we could chat with you. Also, hello, Andrea. From what I've read, I think we might be really aligned with your support areas. So I was wondering if you could share some time to talk with us. We have a few questions about how we make an approach. So once you've got that out of the way, to summarize, your basic formula is, I've learned some things about you. I think you might be interested. And could I ask you a few questions? Once you've got that out of the way, you are ready to really have the conversation in earnest, and you have to do your research. So the first thing is you have to actually do the stuff on the previous slide. You can't just tell them you reviewed their website and hope that it'll be okay in the conversation, but it's amazing how often that step is a problem. And you have to learn everything you can about the foundation so that you don't have any surprises in the call. We're not going to talk about that step in detail because that's its own entire presentation. But if you Google something like foundation prospect research or how to research a foundation, you'll find lots of stuff on the internet about that. And you want to learn who you're speaking to there. Again, it's about people. It's not just about institutions. So think about their seniority, their responsibilities. Are they actually a trustee, or are they just a staff member? Are they voting on the board, or are they coordinating administrative responsibilities? What's their focus area, their background, their expertise in your work? It's going to be really different if you're applying for a music therapy grant to a health and human services funder where all of their program staff are licensed social workers than if it's a general funder who has to be responsible for animal welfare and poverty alleviation and higher education. No one person can be an expert in all those things, and you have to approach it really differently. And finally, I love this quote from Gina Gibney, as a contemporary dance maven in New York. She says, fundraising is what your grandmother taught you. Say please, say thank you, keep your promises. So much of this is just about etiquette and politeness and building good relationships. And often this step kind of goes out the window. So in the heart of the conversation, here are some more specific tactics that I like to use. I find it a little bit like teaching, where I have to have multiple ways to ask the same question or get the same point across. So things like, at Community Music Center, we have a broad ecosystem of programs that all face financial need. We're assessing the focus of our proposal, and we're wondering if anything stands out to you, right? Or we have a number of ways we could frame our work, and after what we've shared today, could you recommend the best way to make an approach? You can even make it about them. Say, you get hundreds of proposals. I'm sure you're busy people. We want to make sure we put our best foot forward. What would you suggest? And then you can get into your specific questions or whatever's relevant to your program. All of these are basically ways of saying, there's multiple ways we could approach you. The risk is you don't want to sound like you're fishing, because then they're just going to tell you to look up how to write a grant, right? They're going to think you're unprofessional or disorganized. But the language that I find is very powerful is around, we have multiple ways we could frame this. There's a number of things we do that align with your work, and make it sound like there's multiple possibilities rather than you don't know what the possibilities are. Similarly, I find it's useful to define my terms a little bit with funders. We were joking that it's a little bit like being with little kids. You give them a forced choice. So if you just ask how they like to think about data, they might not tell you, or they might not know exactly what kind of answer you're looking for. But leading with a question like, I know some funders really like anecdotes and stories, but other funders really like quantitative data about the state of the field. Do you know whether you and your trustees tend to have a preference in your applicants? That's a really useful and really valuable question that will frame how you think about everything else that follows. I also find it's useful sometimes to just tell funders that some policy they have is reasonable. So for example, with a lot of bank foundations, I will say, for example, I know a lot of bank foundations like to have a depositor relationship with their nonprofits. A lot of banks like to support nonprofits that bank with them. That's totally understandable. I definitely understand why you would want to do that. Do you think that would be a challenge for us here? They are by far more likely to say, you know what, yeah, it's really not worth applying in this round. We already have a bunch of account holders who are applying. If you just ask out of the blue, kind of brusquely, they're going to say, no, everyone can apply, please apply. And it'll be a big waste of your time. So helping the person you're talking to feel comfortable is extremely useful. Then there may come a time in the conversation where you have to pivot. You might get a no or a sorry, this doesn't work, it's not the right fit. First of all, that's an application you don't have to do. You can go on to the next one. So often our shortcomings in fundraising are just that we spend too much time on the wrong things. But you don't want to give up the whole thing immediately. So consider something like, would it make sense to consider this at some point down the road? Some of our future plans include the following. Do you think that's something that would be more aligned with what you're talking about here? But there's sometimes, your future plans, your other opportunities just aren't right. In that case, other pivots can be really helpful. The question that our executive director, my boss locally in Washington, often asks is, please keep us top of mind with your colleagues, or is there anyone else you think we should know about? This can be extremely valuable because maybe they can't give you money, but maybe the wealth manager down the hall has a foundation that does exactly what you do. Maybe they'll remember your name at a lunch with someone who says, yeah, I've been looking to support music and arts charities in Boston, and we don't really know where to start. And then that person can volunteer. Oh, I had a great conversation with these guys a couple months ago. You should really check them out. Finally, I find it's always useful to close with a really open-ended question, something like, is there anything else that you wish I had asked you today? Or is there anything else we should know? Most people's tendency is to fill in awkward silences. So often after you ask a question like that, if you don't get an answer right away, you'll start chattering again. This is just a general development trick. Like, don't do that. Just shush, ask the question, and then hush, wait for them to talk. You don't own that awkwardness. They do. It's up to them to say something. Great strategy after you ask someone for money as well. It's exactly the same thing. Then, of course, this is probably pretty rudimentary, but later that day, send a thank you note. When you submit your application, maybe send another one and just say, just letting you know our application's in. Thanks again for chatting with us. Here's a link to this concert we did last Saturday, whatever it is. If you work in the performing arts, ask if they want to be kept on your invitation or mailing list. Ask if they'd like some complimentary tickets for your upcoming performance. In New York, there's a whole kind of cottage industry around this, around members of the press and foundations getting free tickets to performing arts events. There's someone at the Met whose entire job it is just to do this. And then once you get the notification, be gracious, whether it's an award or a rejection, and ask for feedback and see if you can do better. First, though, do double check if they have a standing policy. The numbers of applications are so high now that a lot of foundations just put out a policy, which is either, if we have something to tell you, we'll call you, or we don't do this, don't call us. So just as a review, right? Present your work concisely from 30,000 feet, then give the foundation staff space to talk, make note of how they think, and try to get some of these questions answered so that you're ready to give a really competitive proposal. And with that, we move on to chapter 2, which is some of our live role-playing and examples. I am so excited to introduce a couple colleagues for these who are going to do hypothetical scenarios where we're going to play through this. I'm going to play the part of the program officer, and my colleagues are going to play the part of the grant seeker. So they are all experts in their fields in finance, music therapy, arts administration overall, and so on. They are not fundraisers. So you will get a sense to see how this plays out for someone who is probably a peer in their background in the arts, but maybe being relatively new to fundraising or grant seeking for a lot of you. And we will start today with our first scenario, which is Megan Jasani, who is our Chief Finance and Operating Officer here at CMCB, and who is also a board member for Project STEP. And she will be doing a mock scenario with Project STEP. Megan, are you here and ready to go?
Yes, I am.
Hello, welcome, Megan.
Hello, how are you, Zach? Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Of course, thank you for doing this. So Megan has already been through this presentation before, and she has seen her scenario in advance, but I'm going to throw it up here on the screen. So this is an example of the kind of thing you might see on a funder's website, right? The Edrington Foundation supports educational development and active learning for youth in Missouri and the Northeast region of the United States. We award grants for STEM learning as well as arts activities that enrich young people and expose them to culture. Applications should come in the form of a letter with a budget and financials and are due on the 15th of the month before a board meeting. For questions, please contact grant coordinator Zach Sheets, CPWA at that financial firm. CPWA stands for Certified Private Wealth Advisor. So this is a common arrangement. Megan can expect that I'm someone who works with wealthy clients and helps them do philanthropy as part of their overall wealth management. And then a list of their recent grants. So you can see a combination, St. Louis Symphony, St. Louis Youth Symphony, the BSO, YMCA. This is all hypothetical. Edrington is my father's middle name, and he's from Missouri. He is listening. Hi, Dad. And so this gives you like a really good sense of what their granting is. Prior grants are a really good way to establish what someone actually does, because sometimes on their website, they tell you what they want to think they do. In this case, it seems pretty well aligned. Megan is going to imagine that she is calling Zach Sheets at the firm Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe to make a call and find out maybe some questions she might have about how to approach this foundation. Megan, is there anything you want to say up front? Any like observations or things that you're trying to focus on as you make this call?
Sure. So I think some of the first things that stand out as I look at this is, just the fact that they've made grants in St. Louis in the Missouri area, as well as also the Northeast, specifically in Boston, Massachusetts, Cape Cod. So just really one of the things I'd be interested in is how they've gotten to the point of what they're, kind of focusing on in terms of region, kind of what their draw to the Northeast is, since they are located in Missouri. And then the other thing is just really understanding what split that they would look at for awarding grants. Do they focus more on STEM learning or more on arts activities? And within the arts activities, is it specifically for specific concrete things such as perhaps performances or summer camps, or even something such as funding towards a certain type of training or instruments or something discrete? Or is it a little more broad around overall development?
Sure, yeah. So back to that first bullet point on the insights of like, should we apply for general support or a specific program, and like what's the story? What's the foundation up to? Great, sounds good. So let's do it. We'll do a like ring 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 banana phone situation. Hello, this is Zach Sheets at Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe.
Hi, Zach. This is Megan Jasani with Project STEP. Nice to speak with you today.
Yeah, it's nice to speak with you. You emailed me yesterday, yeah, and just sent ahead a little bit of information about your organization, yes?
Absolutely. So Project STEP is a nonprofit. We're located in Boston. It's a string training educational program for talented young musicians that are from communities that are historically underrepresented in classic music. So really, fellow board member of mine, Alexander Fuchs, who is with the Boston Symphony Orchestra, who I know you have funded in the past, she has recommended that I reach out to you. So she was telling me about you, and I really wanted to set up a call to learn more about your organization and how we may be in a best position to apply for funding from the Edrington Foundation.
Oh yeah, great. I know Alex. She's a friend. Well, wonderful. So I know a little bit about Project STEP, but maybe you can give me sort of a 2-minute explanation of the things you do, and then you mentioned you were interested in applying. So maybe we can get your questions after that.
Okay, that sounds great. So Project Strep, it's a comprehensive long-term string training educational program. Students start as young as kindergarten,
Wow.
and then through a kind of a general focus program that's in our public school system. And then students can apply in, and the program goes up through 12th grade. We've been around for about 35 years, and you know, all of our students in that time, over 2,000 graduates, have gone on to either university or conservatory, with 60% pursuing music as their profession in some way, shape, or form. We are reliant on government grants. We have a budget of just under $1 million. So really what we do is look for funding. We have a lot of funders, both individual as well as many foundations that support us, that will support us in different ways, whether it's for a specific program, for whether it's a specific development area or instruments in various aspects of it.
Okay, great. So it's basically like a arts learning, or like specifically like classical music instruction.
Yes, specifically classical music and on string instruments. So violin, viola, cello, and double bass.
Okay, great.
Those are the only instruments that we practice in.
Well, so we support like the conservatory in Cape Cod, the music school in Springfield, and like the youth orchestra here in St. Louis. Yeah, Mr. Edrington is on the board of the symphony there, which is kind of our longstanding connection. How would you differentiate your services from what these other youth music folks do?
Sure. So one of the differentiating factors is one, the size of our program. We are a smaller program in size. Our current class is the largest we've ever had, with 60 students. And when I say class, I mean that's all the students that we are currently teaching from kindergarten up, or first grade up through 12th grade. So that is the largest we've had. We've been growing over the years. And one of the things that really differentiates us is we really try to identify talent, highly talented students from communities that are historically underrepresented in classic music. We really, at Project Step, we envision a world in which classical music, the classical music profession, will represent the diversity of the community. So the majority of our students are either Black or Latinx from those backgrounds.
Okay, and I'm sorry, Latinx. What is Latinx?
Latino.
Oh, okay. I haven't
Yes.
heard that term before.
Yes.
And yeah, okay. Good. Well, listen. You said you had some questions. Could we
Yes,
get to your question?
absolutely. So what I would love to understand is, as I look at your funding and some of the other organizations, really understanding if you do try to focus your funding on a specific area within a program, or if it's a more general funding for a program. So is it specific to, in the arts organizations, a particular string instrument? Is it around chamber orchestra? Is it around, could it be around instrument repair and rental and maintenance, or summer camp fees? So really just trying to understand what the
Right.
best approach is
Yeah,
as we're
yeah,
putting our best foot forward here.
yeah. So no, good question. So the thing that's important to us is really that we are sort of bringing culture to kids who might not have it otherwise. So what's really important is that you have a program that can make a transformational opportunity for a young person who otherwise wouldn't have opportunities. So we don't care whether it's violin or cello or horn or whatever, but what we want is to see that the poor kids can just get access to things that they don't have at home.
Oh, well, forgive me if I misspoke or gave incorrect impression. This program is not necessarily geared from a socioeconomic perspective towards students. All students receive funding in this program, regardless of need, or many students do not have a financial need for support, but it's just part of the way our program is run. It's really about identifying talented musicians and providing them with the high quality, rigorous training that they would need in order to go on to a profession in music, which many of them choose to do. Some of them do not end up pursuing music, but it becomes a lifelong passion of theirs.
Ah, okay. Sounds good. So, yeah, is there anything else?
Sure. So, if, in terms of putting our best foot forward on a proposal, would you suggest we really focus on the scholarship aspect of our programs for things such as summer camps, or should we focus on a specific area around providing more perhaps master classes, more focused trainings around ensembles or chamber orchestra or anything such as that?
That all sounds pretty specific. I think any of that would probably be good. The scholarship angle probably makes a lot of sense. I think that's something that the trustees would probably get behind.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, our students go to all sorts of summer camps, both domestically and abroad, and it's really, for every one of the students every year, they do this every year, it's a transformative experience for those students. It really has a huge impact on their performance and playing level.
That's
and
great.
their lives in terms of experience.
That's what we like to hear.
Excellent. That's great. So I see that the budget and financials are due on the 15th of the month. So I assume our prior year budget audit financials would be sufficient. And when you say the 15th of the month before the board meeting, could you be a little bit more specific? Are your board meetings monthly? Are they quarterly? So
Yeah,
I just want to make sure as we're preparing our materials.
Sure, they're usually quarterly, but sometimes we have to move it a little bit depending upon when people are free.
Okay, so if we wanted to get in our submissions for the next cycle, would that be the 15th of June for the board meeting that would take place in July?
That docket is really all full, I'm afraid. So
Okay.
I think you would have to get it in for August 15th for our September meeting.
Okay, that sounds fantastic. We will certainly be working on that. Myself or one of my colleagues may be in touch if we have a few more follow-up detailed questions. We certainly would be happy. We'd love to put you on our distribution list so you can learn more about our programming, our concerts. Currently, we're online, so we'd love to, given the closure, we'd love to have you, get exposure firsthand.
I don't really do that, I'm afraid. We have too many people we work with. After you become a grantee, we might do that kind of thing, but it's just, you understand, it's just too many emails.
Of course, totally understand. It can certainly be overwhelming if every single applicant does that. So what we will do is we'll look forward to submitting our application and hearing back from you with any next steps.
Sounds good. Thanks for your time,
Thank you
Megan.
so much for your time, Zach. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, have a great day.
Thanks.
All right. Yeah. Applause for Megan. Great job. So wonderful. The one thing I should have said by way of framing is with each of these, I'm going to be doing a bit. I obviously said a number of things that I personally do not think during the course of that conversation, and that will become relevant later. But as you saw, Megan had to navigate a couple pretty obnoxious things that I said because she is trying to get a grant for her organization, which is doing really good work. And I loved her response when I had this very deficit mindset confusion between the students being people of color and the students necessarily being poor. And she said, oh, actually, no, our students aren't poor. They're just students of color. And we are working with really talented individuals and giving them a place to thrive. And she did it in such a way that she sounded like a leader, right? She wasn't correcting me so much to get back at me, but she was saying it in a way that I realized she actually knows a lot more than I do. And that can often be valuable because it means that when I go to my trustees, what I'm telling them is, yeah, they're doing great work. They've thought of a bunch of stuff I haven't thought of. It's easy to let that slide because you don't want to risk hurting someone's feelings. But it's really past that point, as we have all seen with a lot of evidence that we can't really operate that way anymore. And we got to speak up for how things work. Megan, was there anything that you wanted to comment you thought went particularly well or you wish you had back?
So I think I didn't do as good a job as I could have in terms of digging in to really find out the areas that you in your organization are interested in funding. It sounded like it was very general, and I was trying to figure out the right way to dig in to really understand what the best approach was in applying, which, certainly this is not, and we're all thankful for this. This is not my job to do this. So we're all very happy about that.
We are very happy that you oversee our finance,
in no way, shape, or form at CMCB, nor in my role as a member at STEP do I do this. So I think everyone's happy. But I think that's certainly a trickier area to navigate, especially I would imagine when you're new to this, or even just with different conversations. And again, to your point earlier, it's easier to be live in person than over the phone.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that's a great point. I think that is probably the big one that if I had been in your shoes, I just would have wanted to know more about the story. Like, so a question like, I can see that you support STEM and the arts. That's a little unusual. Is that something Mr. Edrington was passionate about? What's the story behind the selection of your grantees? Right? Or like, yeah, there's so much generous giving. Mr. Edrington was clearly an amazing patron of the arts as well as the sciences. What inspired that legacy? And then you can start to learn a lot about like how the foundation thinks, and then you can just tell them what they want to hear. Because we all know that the work that STEP does is great and it deserves money. So at this point, you're just trying to find a good way to say that the things that you do are the things that we do. Because in any reasonable universe, this person should be interested in funding you. I would maybe suggest a little bit more framing at the beginning. I know it's a little bit abstract since we're just jumping in and out of things, but I found it's very useful just to start with like, hello, I'm from Community Music Center. I have some questions about the foundation. I was wondering if you'd have some time to talk. I can give you a brief overview. We can chat about some of my questions, and then I'd love to hear from you or something like that, just to have them like have a scaffold so that they're not waiting there like, how long am I going to be stuck on this call with this person? Great job on the next cycle. This might have flown by folks, but I gave Megan an unsatisfactory answer. I just said, oh, it's quarterly, but sometimes we reschedule. And she held me to it and said, okay, great. I want to be in the next docket. When can I apply to make sure that happens? Because if we apply, every 6 months, say, if our board meeting was only every 6 months, she might miss the deadline by which the proposal would be reviewed. If she asked for support for summer 2020 and it doesn't get reviewed until September, she's thrown away her application because we're not going to fund it retroactively. The only other two little points I would suggest are with each statement, I would always try to ping a question back to me and get me talking, because we talked about roughly the same amount of time, I think, and really you should try to hear from me even more. If there's, just always kind of find a way to like turn your explanation into a question. And finally, I would have maybe asked me about what size of grant to apply for as a new grantee, since it's all over the map from 5,000 to 150,000 in our hypothetical. Yeah. Oh, and I'm sorry. One last thing, just since I know STEP and I know how many like major prominent awards and recognition you all have, in your pitch, I might have led with like the, getting the medal from Michelle Obama, your students often get national recognition and major press. Like that's the kind of thing that I think is very useful for a person like the person I was playing in that example to be able to hear.
Yeah, no, I think in our practice, I actually did do that, but
yes.
somehow today, on the moment, on the spot. But yeah, absolutely. I actually had that written down in my notes for today. So.
I have definitely forgotten to mention things about CMCB before, put it that way. And this is my job. Well, thank you so much, Megan. We'll go on to example number 2, and that is my friend and colleague, Taniqua Patrick. Please welcome Taniqua, who is CMCB's registrar, as well as the board chair for Dunamis Boston. Are you here, Taniqua?
I'm here. Hey.
Hello. Welcome. So Taniqua also got a kind of brief in advance. This is a little bit of a different scenario from the hypothetical O'Connor Family Trust, a small 501c3 based in Boston. The trust has long-standing relationships with a number of Catholic schools and hospitals and makes regular grants to the nursing program at Mass General Hospital. The trust also has a new competitive program for organizations in the performing arts. We support 501c3s and organizations with fiscal sponsorship that are bringing new, innovative operating models to promote and enhance the reach of the performing arts. For information on the application, contact Zach O'Connor, trustee and CEO. So in this case, Taniqua was actually talking to someone who's a trustee of the foundation, so someone who's going to vote on whether a grant is made. However, it's a common name, so she tries to do her research. She tries to look me up, but she doesn't know who I am. So she's just got to go into this call totally blind. I could be 75 and used to be in an orchestra. I could be 23 and then some idiot kid who inherited the foundation. She has no idea. So, Taniqua, you are in the interesting position of pitching on behalf of Dunamis, which has quite a unusual and special and really vital mission, but not a very common one, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, so our nonprofit, Dunamis, is a nonprofit that is dedicated to providing professional development and nurturing growth for emerging artists and arts managers in Boston. So there is definitely development opportunities in different organizations, but we are purely focused on helping artists of color to be able to stand on their own feet and have their own agency and, provide transformative growth to themselves and to their community.
Yeah, great. You just sort of did your elevator pitch, but we'll pretend now that we're jumping into a call. So, in this case, there's no real information on the application other than that it's a competitive proposal. So, in this case, what Taniqua's really got to do is get me on the phone, tell me a little bit about her organization, give me a little pitch, and then see if she can figure out what the next steps would be to apply. This would be a very common situation for a small family foundation. You would probably find this information in their tax records. They might not even have a website. It's very, very, very common. So are you ready, Taniqua?
Yeah.
Great. Well, ring, ring, ring. Hello, this is Zach O'Connor at the O'Connor Family Trust.
Oh, hi, Zach. My name is Taniqua Patrick. I'm calling on behalf of Dunamis.
Hi, Taniqua. Yeah, thanks for making some time.
Oh, not a problem. I was actually calling because I had the opportunity to look at your website and I was super interested in the work that you're doing. I feel like it aligns with what we're doing, and I was hoping to introduce myself and get a little more information on your grant program.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for the introduction, and I'd love to hear about what you do, and then let me know what questions I can answer for you.
For sure, absolutely. So Dunamis is a nonprofit that seeks to nurture the transformative growth and professional development of artists and arts managers in Boston. We do that in a variety of ways, by community building, by consultations, um, uh, teaching folks to advocate for themselves, and a bit of production as well. So we have multiple venues, and we're doing a lot of great work in the city.
Well, that's great. And so where does the money actually go? It goes towards events or concerts or professional development? Like, how do you actually spend contributed revenue?
Absolutely. So a great bulk of our finances go into providing the professional development aspect for our artists and arts managers. We have a cohort called the Emerging Artist Fellowship that is dedicated to nurturing our artists within their artistry, providing professional development. And then we also have an arts managers program that allows the same aspects, but for arts managers and people who are interested in producing events on their own. So those are our main streams of venue. Our other streams, such as we have a Young Artist Mixer series, primarily a house sessions that is a way that helps spotlight the artists that we work with, but it is also a source of income for us, as well as our Seeds of Joy program, which is actually sponsored, and they're just providing joy to the community through our personal cohort and through our colleagues across the city.
Got it. Well, that certainly sounds like something we'd be interested in. We have a competitive grant program that's for organizations in the performing arts that are doing sort of new or innovative approaches to promoting and enhancing the reach of things like music, like classical music, or going to museums, or things like that. You said you had some questions or things you wanted to know?
Yeah, absolutely. I was hoping to just get a better idea of the grant itself, specifically how do we apply, and what specifically are you looking for as far as things that align with your mission and goals, and the organizations that you currently work with.
Sure. Yeah. So to start, we like to start with sort of a simple letter of inquiry. So you could just send us 1 or 2 pages, a lot of the kind of stuff that you just said to me, and we could probably go from there if you just want to send that letter to the address that's on our tax forms.
Sure, absolutely. Just wondering, is there anything specific that you would like to hear anything that you wish people said in their proposals?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, I mean, we like to, we like to hear why your work is innovative. And, since we're a small family foundation, every dollar counts. We really like to know sort of, what exactly how you spend the money, really specific. Like, we don't often just give like $5,000 as a lump sum, but we'll give, $4,387. It's like exactly reimbursing certain expenses.
Oh, sure, that's awesome. You specified that you give between $4,000 and $5,000. I'm just wondering specifically how much that grantee should be asking for. Um,
Yeah, good question. It's usually in that range, something like $3,000 to $5,000.
okay. And are there what's your reporting process? Do you need
Uh,
anything formal, informal?
yeah, it's pretty relaxed. After about a year, maybe just send us a note and let us know what you've done with the funds.
Sure, okay. And then is there anything else that you think that we should know about you? We are definitely a community-based organization, and I would love to get to know you better.
Yeah, that's great. I'd love to learn more about what you all do, and I'd love to stay in touch. If you got a mailing list or something, I can give you my email. I'd love to stay on it. I keep telling the website people, though, they keep forgetting to update this. You have an annual operating budget of at least $200,000, right? Because that's a requirement to apply.
Oh, actually, at this time, we do not.
Oh shoot! I'm so sorry. Yeah, I told the guys they don't change it.
It's, website developers are their
Yeah,
issues.
tell me about it, right?
Yeah, yeah. But, is this something that we could potentially be considering in the future?
Yeah, so absolutely, it's a strict threshold. My mother, she put it in place. She's really strict about budgets and numbers and stuff. But that might change in the future, and as soon as you hit that threshold, then you could come back and apply.
Oh, absolutely. Well, that's awesome. I'm hoping, even though we can't apply with you, it would be awesome if, you thought about keeping us in mind. If you know any other organizations or funders who are providing organizations with funds like our organization, we would be really grateful to be a part of those conversations.
Yeah, actually, come to think of it, this is what we can do. I'm so sorry it didn't work out today, but my uncle Michael, he lives down in Dedham. He's got a foundation, and he does sort of like economic development stuff. So I can write you and introduce you. He also loves the arts. It's great. I think he might be interested in this since it's about this kind of like skill building and workforce development and preparing future leaders. So just send me an email with kind of what you said here, and I'll forward you to him, and I can introduce you to him. And I think he might be interested in getting an application from you.
Awesome. I will absolutely do that. And on top of that, you said that you are also interested in hearing about us, so I'll make sure to get you on our mailing list as well. So
Yeah,
thank you
terrific.
so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you, Taniqua.
Alrighty, have a great
Stay
one.
in touch. All right, let's hear for Taniqua. That was awesome. Terrific. Very well done. Of course, the crux of that one was the pivot, where I sort of surprised you by telling you at the last minute that it wouldn't work. You handled it beautifully, right? You immediately jumped to, would this make sense in the future? And got someone else out of me, right? I made another point of connection, and you reminded me at the end. You confirmed that I wanted to stay in touch and wanted to be on your email list and hear from you. Great, diligent, thoughtful, quick on your feet. Awesome. From you, was anything that sort of jumped out or stood out? Anything you would want a second try at if you had another chance?
I feel like I talked too much, and I was trying to fill spaces. There was moments where I was trying to give a pause, but I did the thing where you chatted before they answered. So something to work on for sure.
Yeah, great. And it was sort of in particular in the middle part of the call, as you were doing like the second part of your pitch, when I solicited a little more information, you maybe got pretty deep in the weeds of your lines of business, where you could have stayed just maybe floated a little bit higher on the surface, and then it pinged it back to me a little bit more quickly. But I thought that first pitch was great. The way you framed the conversation was great. Like, did we all feel just how at ease I was able to be the way Taniqua first answered the phone, to be like, this is who I am, this is why I'm calling, this is what I need of you, would you be so kind as to share some time with me? Like immediately it got us off on the right foot. It was great. Yeah, I think we will go on to the next scenario unless there's anything else, Taniqua.
No, that was great. Thank you so much.
Cool, thank you. All right, so scenario number 3, I'll be joined by a tag team of Chris Perry, who's our Director of Music Therapy here at CMCB, and Michael Di Pasquale, who's our Director of In-House Programs. Chris and Michael, are you there?
Yep.
Hey, Zach.
Hello. So this is a very common situation. I am very often on calls with Lacolian, for example. It takes some coordination, right? Because when you ask a question, you don't want to be like, sorry, well, I guess that's not a good look. And so you often want to have some sort of plan. You often want to coordinate a little bit. What we often do is that one person leads and then invites the other person into the conversation when relevant. So often Lacolian is leading and then will bring me in only if he needs something from me. And so then I know I keep my pie hole shut until Lacolian points at me and says, please, Zach, why don't you jump in on that one? So this is our final example, a little bit wordier. So this is the hypothetical Lure Family Foundation. With 3 million in annual gifts, grants, and contributions, the Lure Family Foundation has established itself as one of the foremost supporters of arts, culture, and education in New England. For immediate release, a request for proposals from May 29th. In response to overwhelming demonstration of need from communities, in 2020, we are implementing a request for proposals for disability arts access grants. Arts and cultural organizations with a budget of 1 million or more are encouraged to apply. Grants will range between 50,000 and 100,000 and may be either single or multi-year. The deadline is June 17th. Awards will support organizations that serve individuals with disabilities, either for programs or ADA capital repairs. There's some values around learning, education, mentorship, understanding, and so on. And then this little bit of information. To schedule a 15-minute appointment, please contact Zach Sheets, Program Officer for Arts and Culture, a dedicated leader within philanthropy. Zach has over 5 years experience administering grants in the arts and culture sector. So Chris and Michael, you're going to call on behalf of sort of a real life CMCB initiative, which is called All In, which is well, I will let you explain it during your pitch. How about that? I'll maybe we'll dive right into this one. I imagine folks have some feelings about some of the information on this slide, but we can maybe talk about it after actually, and see how it shapes the way you approach this. Are you guys ready to go?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Great. So we'll imagine you have scheduled your 15-minute appointment. For the purposes of this, let's imagine you sent ahead a one-pager on CMCB. So I basically know about CMCB, and in this call, you'll just tell me about All In. So ring, ring. Hello, this is Zach Sheets at the Lure Family Foundation. Is this Chris and Michael from CMCB?
Hi, Zach. This is Chris and Michael. Thank you so much for making time to meet with us today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, and thank you for sending ahead that one pager. You guys do a lot of stuff. You have so many different programs, but you mentioned All In particular is something that might be of interest to us here at the Lure Family Foundation and our new RFP. I'd love to hear about it.
Thanks so much for having us, Zach. This is Chris Perry, Director of Music Therapy speaking. And I know that you've received a little bit of information about the Community Music Center of Boston, but I want to talk to you specifically about our work with individuals with disabilities. So we are in the middle of a multi-year initiative called the All In Initiative to make sure that all individuals can access all of our programs. And we have 3 parts. The first one we've started this year, which is awareness, where we're doing a lot of professional development. And what we're really looking forward to soon is increasing more access through capital improvements, and then eventually more inclusive programming.
Great. Well, that sounds like exactly what we'd be looking at. You have a budget of 1 million or more?
That is correct.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was just wondering a little bit about your story. I noticed that you have a new initiative as part of Disability Arts, and I'm wondering how that came about and a little bit about your vision for disability access.
Yeah, great question. So the Lure Family Foundation historically was supporting pretty conventional arts and culture organizations, big shops like the Gardener, the BSO, things like that. And we realized, of course, recently it's become very trendy. All the conversations that we see are about diversity and inclusion. And we realized a big space where we were failing was that, a lot of our grantees didn't do a lot with accessibility. And so we decided that was a space where we really, thought we could make a difference, and where we felt like we knew how our funds could be leveraged for success. And so we've started this new program. As you know, we're one of the most significant funders in New England, and this seemed like a really good direction to go in for that.
Thanks so much for that response. I'm wondering if I can ask a little bit more of a specific question about your vision for arts experiences with individuals with disabilities.
Sure.
Some funders and some organizations like to provide more passive experiences, like sensory-friendly concerts, but other organizations like to provide more active learning opportunities. Is there a specific one of those that the Lure Family Foundation is interested in funding?
Oh, boy, good question. We haven't really thought about that. Active learning is good. Passive learning is good. It's really just about, bringing opportunities to people who might not have them otherwise. We want to see that both normal families and families with disabilities can access programs.
Thanks so much for that response. Michael, do you have a question that you want to jump in with?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again for having us, Zach, and for giving us a moment to ask the questions. When I was looking at the call for proposals, I did notice that you had mentioned the possibility of being awarded single or multi-year grants, and it made me wonder what for you constitutes a multi-year grant for this foundation.
Yeah, so if there's a project you think you can solve in 1 year, that would really be a 1-year grant. And if there's a project that you think would take a little bit longer, because we really want to see like a major shift in who you're able to serve. So if it's like a bigger capital project that would take multiple years, or like an ongoing program, that would really be more of a multi-year grant.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, because as you know, sort of the things that we hope to solve with a grant like this are longstanding and intractable. And so our All-In initiative is really meant to serve as a multi-year initiative with a number of different layers. Is it okay if we sort of walk you through what those layers look like and see if it's aligned with your vision for outcomes that you'd hope for?
Sure, yeah.
Great. Chris, would you like to?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think initially we are interested in ADA capital repairs. We are a large community organization, but we do have a home in the south end of Boston that we're looking to make some changes so that individuals with disabilities can participate. And then once that happens, we really want to be able to invite individuals with disabilities more equitably and with more dignity into all of our programs. I really feel like the values of access and equity that the Community Music Center of Boston has lines up with yours. I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit around your values around learning and education.
Sure, yeah. So we like to have the position that nonprofits can really learn from our expertise, and they can know what the best ways are to approach these problems, because we do a lot of this. We work with a lot of nonprofits, we invest in a lot of organizations, so we can really share what we hear from them with nonprofits, but we also then want to hear back from nonprofits what their needs are with us. And so, for example, I'm curious to hear, Michael, you mentioned that these problems are intractable, but I mean, if they're intractable, how would a grant help you solve them?
Well, that actually reminded me that I noticed in the proposal, or the call for proposals rather, that you mentioned that you can fund either programs or ADA capital repairs. And that brings me back towards the sort of the sequence of things that we'd like to do with funding like this, which would start with capital repairs, because they're certainly the first step to making our building more accessible and inclusive. But then we would hope to really expand that into scholarship programs aimed at students with disabilities to make them feel supported and like they have the optimum amount of access to take part in our programs. And then varied programming that's both passive, like we mentioned, being able to attend concerts and events, but also very active. We want these students to feel included and not othered and welcome to take part in literally any program that we can offer. So we would actually create programs around that initiative. And then finally, we would hope to use funding to market and promote specifically to members of those communities, so that they know that these are options that we have and that this is a very strong and poignant focus of ours.
Great. So it sounds like where you would really have some synergy with us would be around this idea of like a multi-phase program. So what I would probably recommend is you start with a sort of year one, you itemize some certain things that you'd be doing, and then maybe year two where you're doing the bulk of the work, and then maybe like a year three where you're moving into this sort of promotion phase, if I understand correctly. And you can ask for different amounts each year. So maybe in one of the years it's a little bit less, maybe in one of the years it's a little bit more, and then a little bit less again, kind of like a bell curve. That really seems like it would work well with what you're doing, and with the kind of strategy and tactics that we like to have.
Absolutely. If you don't mind me asking, I did notice that you have a pretty quick turnaround for the proposals, and that made me feel like you have a very strong sense of what you're looking for. Do you mind speaking to sort of the most important qualities that you look for in a grant proposal?
Yeah, good question. Well, no, to be honest, we set the deadline because that's when we needed for our meeting with our trustees. We were kind of delayed getting the RFP out. But so, like I said, I think what we're looking for is that, we can really sort of get in, get out, make a big difference. You really achieve a lot here. And so this idea that, you could come away with something really radically different than where you started, I think would really be the turning point that would help set you apart.
Yeah, because of our mission alignment, I feel like we could end up having a long-standing relationship. And we're really excited to show you sort of what the beginning of that relationship looks like through our proposal. I think my colleague Chris might have another question.
Yeah, I just had a brief question about how your organization likes to receive information. We have the option of, we have so many amazing stories of the individuals with disabilities we serve, but we're also an organization that collects a lot of data. Do you think it would be more successful for us to focus on data and numbers, or to focus more generally on the stories of the individuals that we are already working with?
Yeah. I mean, I would say both. Numbers are good, and stories are good too. I think both things could really factor into a proposal.
That absolutely makes sense. In other proposals in the past, has there been something specific that the board has that has really resonated with the board?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think for them it's useful if they can see the way the system is changing overall, like the way an organization is able to put in like a wheelchair ramp or something like that. But then also to be able to understand the specific story of a person who was affected by that. Generally, that's been the most successful thing that I've seen. Those kind of proposals generally tend to do pretty well. But it is a new initiative, so it can't always be too sure.
Great. I think those are most of the questions that I have. Michael, is there anything else that you have?
I actually got to run in a second, guys. So if we can wrap it up pretty soon.
All right, great. I guess we'll just wrap it up by asking: is there anything else that we should know that we didn't speak about today?
No, I was glad to talk to you guys. I didn't mean to cut you off, Michael, if you had something to say, but I think we're probably good.
No, I just wanted to thank you again for your time. I feel like we have a strong mission alignment, and I see a long-standing partnership here. And so we really look forward to submitting our proposal and hearing your thoughts about it.
Great. Well, thank you, gentlemen, and I look forward to your proposal.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Okay, so sometimes program officers, most of the time, almost all the time, program officers are lovely, wonderful people who get involved with philanthropy because they want to make the world a better place. Chris and Michael handled that great. I tried to get under their skin and they weren't flappable. Right, there was this key moment in the conversation where I revealed a lot about myself, where I asked Chris if they want to think things both about families with disabilities and normal families. That's super telling. Immediately, he knew everything he needed to know about me. And at that moment in the conversation, they pivoted from trying to get like smart, sophisticated strategy from me to just like telling me that they're a leader and that they're going to do good work, because they knew that like I wasn't going to be that helpful to them. They tried, you know, but like I was purposely frustrating them a little bit, and sometimes that's how it works. But sometimes people like me in that scenario are a gatekeeper. There were probably a lot of red flags where they could have known this in advance. For example, $3 million is not very much money for a foundation, so the fact that they thought they were one of the foremost supporters of the arts is incorrect. They're rolling out a brand new program and making $100,000 investments in organizations when they've never done disability before. And the person overseeing it is an arts and culture officer who has only 5 years experience in philanthropy. That's not an organization that's thinking carefully. And to Michael's point about the deadline, we only gave people 3 weeks to get a proposal together. That's not adequate if we want to solve, you know, significant challenges. And each time I frustrated them, they kept their cool. They were sort of reserved and calm, thought about the best way that they could put their best foot forward. It was really good. I feel like I need to go take a shower now. I said the word synergy and get in, get out. Like, ugh. Did you like, I imagine that was like sort of annoying, but did you guys have anything, you know, that you found worked well for you, or like moments that you thought were important to mention?
You can go first, Michael, if you have anything.
I feel like having gone through it live, I feel like it would have been helpful to coordinate the arc of our questions, because we did jump around subject matter a bit. That being said, like you mentioned, once we realized certain things about you as a person in this character, of course, you know, we had to be nimble and kind of move to something else because time is precious and we recognized that you weren't going to be on the line forever.
Yeah, and you know, lest you had any doubts about the sophistication of our foundation, our values spell the word lemurs. So this is not an organization that thinks very carefully, right? So, what we saw throughout these conversations is that so much of this work is about personal interactions, and who you know and who's in your network matter a lot. And the way you move through the world is often really deeply shaped by your identity, and the way you interact with people often emerges from aspects of that, right? And so we're going to turn here to chapter 3 of this presentation and look at the ethics of this and the ways we move through this world. And as with many features of American life, segregation and inequality tend to be particularly concentrated around questions of race and ethnicity, and that is certainly true of navigating arts and culture and philanthropy. So let's start by looking at who we are, and let's start with foundations, the people who write checks, who give out money. This is from a study done by BoardSource called Leading with Intent, and it was a series of surveys both to foundations and to nonprofits. And on the foundation side, this shows executives, board chairs, and board members of foundations who participated in the survey. And we notice that executives are around 90% white, board chairs are 90 to 95% white, and boards overall are 85% white. But unfortunately, even that is too soothingly vague, because there are a lot of foundations that are by and for people of color that tend to overrepresent people of color among their board executives and staff, which means that when you take that out and look at the rest, 2 out of 5 foundation boards did not have a single person of color. And this is organizations that signed up to be part of a survey about diversity and equity. So we can only imagine what the true sample looks like. Now, small family foundations have a different kind of composition structure. It's within a family, but even when we exclude them, 35% have all white boards. And I think the most astonishing to me is 44% of community foundations have all white boards. when we're talking about these kind of exchanges that Megan and Taniqua and Chris and Michael were having, when we think about who it is who's in these positions of power, that matters a lot. And this is a level of satisfaction with demographic diversity as reported by board executives. And to be fair, 50% of executives say that they're not satisfied with the racial diversity. But these statistics haven't changed in 20 years. The proportion of people of color on boards and the level of satisfaction hasn't changed as reported by the people who could snap their fingers and do something about it. And there's a lot of aspects to identity. Unfortunately, it's pretty hard to get data about socioeconomic status, ability status, or gender and sexuality because we don't often report those in the workplace. But it's worth considering, given how segregated and how unbelievably homogenous so many of these foundations are, if 26% of executives are satisfied with the racial diversity, what does it mean that 24 or 14 or 9% are satisfied with the representation of people with a disability on their board? It's got to be so much worse. But it's easy to cast criticism at foundations, the wealthiest among us. We ought to look in the mirror ourselves as well. Because if we look at nonprofits and charities, the kind of people who are doing this work on a daily basis, well, the statistics aren't terribly different. Around 90% of chief executives are white, 90% of board chairs, and 85% of board members. Now, we are blessed to have such an extraordinary community of supporters, and we have an amazing board, much more diverse than these statistics, but we still have a number of white members on our board, and we're so glad to have them and so welcoming that they're here. That's not the question. It's not about individual people. The question is about what it means overall when all of these structures are so homogenous and when so much power flows between these two parties. Now, you may be thinking, okay, but that's the US overall, right? We should look at cities, which are much more diverse than a place like Idaho or Vermont. Well, we don't have that data for Boston, as far as I know. If someone does know of that, please be in touch with me. I would love to see it. But our colleagues down the road at the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs did a landmark study in 2015 that led to something called the Create NYC Cultural Plan. It's an extraordinary document. It's provocative and in many ways quite radical for philanthropy. And it governed the way the Department of Cultural Affairs there makes use of their $51 million budget. They surveyed 922 nonprofit arts and culture organizations who returned surveys about their board and staff. And just for reference, census data shows that New York is around 67% people of color. New York City public schools, like the Boston public schools, are often more like 85% people of color, right? So that's the kind of layout of the city we're talking about here. And yet, when we look at who's staffing arts organizations, it's 2 to 1 in the opposite direction. Almost 2/3 of staff at arts and culture organizations receiving public money are white. And there's no long-standing history or orthodoxy of who's the composition of a foundation's leadership. These are just hiring decisions that we make every day. So not that there's a good excuse for the homogeneity of foundations, but we have no excuse when it comes to the arts and culture sector. We're just hiring people. And if we just hired people at random, it would look so much different than this. Never mind if we took into account all of the extraordinary talent pipelines and all of the extraordinarily skilled people that there are making art and leading organizations. And the higher up the ladder you go, the worse it gets. White folks account for 55% of junior staff, but 75% of senior staff in arts organizations, which means that the talented people who are there, who are people of color, are often getting pushed out. And if we look even more specifically at the kind of roles people fulfill, if you look at the right end of the chart, which shows the percentage of white staff broken down by role, if we look at things like curator, designer, leadership, board development, marketing, the primarily artistic and fundraising kinds of tasks, they're the most concentrated in whiteness that is way out of alignment with what the city looks like as a whole. But when we look at jobs that are often much less well paid and often custodial or clerical, like security or facilities, retail or patron services, these are the ones that disproportionately represent people of color. So if you think back to that pie chart, that 62%, not only do white folks make up 2 to 1 the overall staff, they make up 3/4 or 4/5 of the folks who are actually making decisions about how money flows and who gets investment. And to come back to our board point from earlier, even in the most diverse city in America, white people still account for 75% of the boards of nonprofit arts and culture organizations, which is barely different than the statistics for America as a whole. And that's in a city that is overwhelmingly has a population of people of color at every level of civic service, government, finance industry, software industry. A lot of these industries are doing even better than we are in the arts and culture industry to represent people of color among their staff. Most notably for me was this finding from the Create NYC plan, which is that the largest percentage of philanthropic support comes from individual donors, generally speaking, around 42%. But studies show that these resources primarily go to large institutions. Meanwhile, a DeVos Institute of Management study showed that arts organizations whose mission is to serve people of color and low-income communities had only 5% contributed revenue from individual donors because those networks are just unavailable to them. So what that means is that as we're under pressure to keep our doors open, paradoxically, organizations that work with communities of color are much more reliant, on average, on precisely this kind of institutional and government support, which we just demonstrated are so homogenous and so white. 42% versus 5%. And all of this plays out, as we saw in our examples, on an asymmetrical power relationship. We like to joke here about the golden rule. If you have the gold, you make the rules, right? If you're the one person who tells a funder what they want to hear, maybe you're the one who's going to get a grant. So what I would ask to my colleagues here today who do work in fundraising, particularly if you work for predominantly white institutions, is ask yourself, are you trying to make a bigger pie or are you trying to secure yourself a bigger slice? Because if you're not advocating for the entire sector, you're actually doing the sector a pretty significant disservice. And this brings us to our final chapter, which is how we tell stories and how we talk about ourselves. Now, the way that we talk about ourselves needs to be absolutely as sophisticated as the way we talk about young people in the classroom or the way we talk about our performances on stage. We use words to construct the way we think about the world, so they matter a lot. And you have to say what you mean, and you have to name the problem. And so often we don't do this. And that's because I think we like to think of grants as apolitical or removed from the everyday world, right? You just wordsmith and then you get money. But when we're talking about schools, we're talking about what the future looks like. When we're talking about the arts, we're talking about a kind of storytelling that imagines what the future could be. And that's as political as it can possibly get. So if you're working in grants, you need to find ways to build fluency in talking about issues like race or class or disability advocacy. Think about all the dumb things I said on behalf of the Luer Family Foundation. If whoever's on the other end of that call thinks those things too, imagine how long that gets propagated. And I think it's important to remember that we're not really talking about policing language here. As Eric Gensler put it, we're really talking about what it means for people to just be excluded. This isn't about jargon. This isn't about necessarily knowing the right word to say. It's about knowing what the strategy is to solve some of these chronic problems. So there's some very common pitfalls that we tend to fall into, and these reflect the biases that we often absorb from the world around us. And there's 3 big ones that I'd like to talk about. We may run a few minutes over. I'm happy to stick around for questions. I do want to be respectful of people's time. If you have to drop off at 7:30, I totally understand. If there's any questions you want to ask directly, feel free to throw them in the chat. I can follow up with you later, or you can send me an email. My email's on the CMCB About Us page. It's sheets@cmcb.org. So let's take each of these 3 pitfalls in turn, which are ones we see quite often. And the first is commonly talked about as a deficit mindset or as a kind of savior complex. So ask yourself, for example, if you're an educational organization, do you talk about your students as full of potential or in need of a savior? And do you fantasize that perhaps that savior is you? Because if so, you've stopped making it about the students and made it about yourself. So a test is, try some of the language you use while thinking of a student at a private school or even just an average kid from the suburbs. Does it still sound right? If you're working for Milton Academy or Phillips Exeter and you say, yeah, we're just trying to get our kids off the streets, Does that sound appropriate to you? No, you would never have that expectation for that student. But if philanthropists are thinking that way and nonprofits are thinking that way, and they're orbiting one another in a concentric circle, that starts to become a huge problem. And, like I said, it's about unifying ourselves behind the most successful strategy, because saying things like urban or at risk, it's not just lazy writing. It can perpetuate the fundamentally wrong idea about the way to solve a problem. We saw this a little bit in Chris Perry's talk on accessibility and disability advocacy when he talked about the social structures of disability, right? And he mentioned the example that a blind person in a restaurant is not incapable of going to the bathroom. That's not the problem. The problem is that the restaurant has not invested in handicap accessible restrooms that can be treated, or that can treat people with dignity and independence to be able to use the restroom. It's a social function, and it's much larger than one person. And it's the same thing here, right? If we talk about at risk, well, all young people are at risk for something, but what that is depends on your zip code. And so if you use at risk only to mean certain zip codes, then what you're doing is taking really broad societal problems and making them about a specific block or a specific neighborhood. And you're making the students and the families who live there the solution and the problem to this issue, when they are neither. They're just families who are in your programs. But when you start using this language or dog whistle or be coded or don't say what the issue is, then you flatten what actually specifically you could be doing to help them. So, for example, let's look at a real life example. It's a great nonprofit in Harlem called BroSys. It's founded in 1995, comprehensive holistic support. They're an evidence-based program. They do great work, organize and advocate for social change, publish curricula, train educators on our model. Here's how they were described by the Chronicle for Philanthropy recently. A Harlem nonprofit shows how to keep kids in school and out of trouble by giving them the tools they need to transcend racism, poverty, and now the coronavirus. Little did you know, 8-year-olds were responsible for racism, poverty, and the coronavirus, right? It looks ridiculous, and it feels ridiculous because we've made those students responsible for something that's so much bigger than them. And yeah, they will have to deal with all of those things, but it's not their problem and it's not their fault to solve. And if we hold them accountable for that, when we as a society of 330 million people and the wealthiest country in the world can't solve those problems, we're setting them up to fail. And this brings us to another major pitfall we tend to fall into, and that's the idea of exceptionalism. And for this, we look at number 42 himself, Mr. Jackie Robinson. And we can consider that the story of Jackie Robinson is often a classic example of how whiteness obscures racism, because it makes racism invisible. Robinson is often celebrated as the first African-American to break the color line and play in Major League Baseball. So the subtext is that Robinson finally had what it took to play with whites. But really the story is that Jackie Robinson was the first person that whites allowed to play baseball. Those of you might know this is a quote from Robin DiAngelo's book on white fragility. It's an amazing book, particularly for white folks. And what this lets us do is, rather than reckon with our biases and stereotypes, we pat ourselves on the back for being able to name specific exceptions to them. And we erase the fact that the real problem here was all of the great baseball players before Jackie Robinson, who were people of color, would have been hauled off the field by police if they tried to step onto the field. That's the real problem. So here's some basic examples of the way this can play out in your thinking when you're writing a grant, right? Instead of saying we serve urban at-risk youth, which is vague and obscures what's actually going on, just say 60% of our students are Black and Hispanic. Instead of saying many students are poor, 71% are economically disadvantaged. Look up the statistic. The school system has it. Just say the scope of the problem or the scope of the need. Instead of saying that communities need your help, say that they face disinvestment, because that's what's real. If they had the kind of money and access to resources that a lot of suburbs have, they wouldn't need your help. And instead of talking about students like empty vessels that you serve each week, think about how many participate in your programs. It may be a subtle change in your language or your thinking, but it's really important because it changes the way you fundamentally conceive of what it is you do and how it is you advocate on people's behalf. And that is where things get really important for the ethics of how we do this work, right? Instead of talking about youth with challenges, talk about youth who behave informed by trauma. Instead of talking about partners who can't pay up, talk about how there's longstanding shortfalls in civic investment, because these are the things we need to bring to funders' attention anyway. Now, finally, something we've seen a lot of in the past couple of days in particular is this final pitfall, and that's the idea of appropriating credit. That's the idea that you can pat yourself on the back for something that actually you had nothing to do with. So these are a series of things I've seen recently and what I see when I see them. So several of our prominent alumni are people of color. That sounds nice, but what I hear is there are 127 million people of color and 3 of them went here. If that's your bar for success, you're not doing very well, and you're treating those individual ones as tokens without actually accounting for whether they felt supported at your school, whether people were hostile to them, whether they have nothing good to say about you after they've left. Or for example, we were one of the first conservatories in the country to offer jazz. What I hear is, we teach a music that some Black people play. Again, what are you taking credit for? Like, why do you think this is relevant? And what do you think the stakes are in this conversation? Often this will play out on a number of lines with marginalized people. And so, for example, you'll often see things like, we're a really welcoming work environment. Like, we have trans staff members, which means like a trans person exists in my office and I haven't exploded, so we're doing a great job. Like, that just means that a person exists. And if that's your barrier, or if that's your bar for success, you are probably setting up so many barriers that you have no idea about. And finally, and this is one that Chris actually caught with me recently, is when you say something like, we have programs for people with disabilities in our music therapy department, what you're doing actually is saying that you define people by their medical diagnosis. Why wouldn't someone with a disability just want to take violin lessons? Why do you have to route them towards a specific kind of service that you feel is the only thing that they might want to be interested in? But remember that it's couched under this guise of like talking about how good we are and patting ourselves on the back, and that's really dangerous. So the thing to remember here is that it's not what a claim says, it's about how it functions in a conversation. What role does it play in the kind of bigger picture understanding we have about how we approach equity? We're going to skip this example because I think it's going to be pretty basic, but the Met put out a big like hashtag Black Lives Matter tweet while they simultaneously have a performance for Rent on their website with Anna Netrebko performing in blackface. And like, let's not even go there. It's so bananas. So this is the kind of thing we might see a lot, which is on the surface of it, like a seemingly nice thing. We serve urban at-risk youth, many of whom struggle with truly unthinkable challenges. Many more struggle to learn English. All of this language is about deficits, and it's about how you can be a savior for people you think have deficits. But compare it to this kind of language, which says what's actually happening, which instead of talking about students who can't learn English, talks about students who are soon going to be bilingual. That doesn't just say that, schools are overwhelmingly Black, but it says schools are overwhelmingly Black, and that's a problem because of the wealth gap, right? That doesn't just say we have DEI hiring practices. It says we hire people who have a history of youth development work in disinvested communities. And I know that grant writers are always obsessed with word counts and want things to be as slick and punchy as possible. But I got to tell you, the second one's shorter. It takes a lot more work and a lot more time to craft it this way, but it says what's actually going on. It educates funders on the problem and doesn't throw all the people you're trying to champion under the bus along the way. So as we're wrapping up here, just remember, if you're responsible for securing resources, you have tremendous authority. And if you have a voice in the hall of power, you have power yourself. So you have to consider how you came to understand the world around you and how that's reflected in the way that you're talking and writing and going about your work every day. Because if you're like me, you're having conversations like the ones I had with Chris and Michael and Taniqua all the time. So you have to embrace humility and self-awareness. If one of your colleagues tells you, hey, that's actually not how we think about our students, don't answer, well, it's how I think about it in the grant. Say, okay, tell me more. Because that's how you're going to examine your biases, and that's how you're going to hang on to this idea that we're all continuously improving, that we've all grown up relentlessly peppered with negative stereotypes and prejudices. And if we can acknowledge that and acknowledge that this is much larger than any of us, then we can start to break that cycle a little bit. And that, I think, is the most important thing of all. We have some time for questions. I'm happy to stick around. I know we're a couple minutes over. Thank you all so much for joining us here. You know, as always, we do rely on our family of supporters and our community of friends to help make our transformative work possible every day. If you would like to make a donation, you can text CMCB to that number. You can just do it right from your phone. It'll handle everything for you. And you know, we would so value and appreciate your support. And we thank you for joining us today for this conversation. With that in mind, are there any questions that people would like to throw into the chat? Or you can use the raise your hand feature if you know how to do that on the participants list. I'll give another minute or two for questions if people are thinking.
I've got a quick question, Zach.
Sure. Yeah.
If that's all right.
Yeah.
Which is just you mentioned that part when we were speaking where you mentioned individuals with disabilities and normal people, and I regret the way that I did not change the language in the moment, and I'm just wondering, you know, without sharing a specific experience, perhaps. But where's your call on that? I mean, I came out of it feeling really gross, and I'm just wondering how I could have handled that situation better in the future.
Yeah. So the first thing is, like, sometimes you can't fix it. Like, it's too complicated. There's too many hangups. You know, I had a funder tell me once, just in the middle of the call, like, every godforsaken chorus and every godforsaken village in Africa has a chorus. So why should I give you money, right? I'm not going to fix that one. Like, I just said, okay, thanks. That's not appropriate. Like, have a nice day. I think in that case, the best strategy is to try to capitalize on it as an opportunity to lead as gently as possible. Lacolian is very good at this. I really admire the way he approaches it. And so, for example, what you could have said in that moment is something like, yeah, you know, actually, as we're trying to solve a lot of these really difficult challenges, it's really important to us that we think of all of our families as valuable. And we really want to embrace this idea that with equity comes joy. And to be honest, actually thinking of families as disabled and normal is precisely the kind of thing that this initiative is helping us move beyond. Which puts me back on my heels, but in a way that makes me just think that, like, you've thought about this more than I have. It's tricky. It's tricky, and I threw that at you on purpose. I'm sorry to, you know, make you feel gross, but it's the kind of thing that happens all the time in these calls. And you know, until you have a lot of practice, it's hard. And even then, like, sometimes you just get totally caught off guard with the wild things that people say to you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. It looks like Ray Rodriguez from Action has a question. Ray, do you want to type it, or do you want to? Hi.
So I created an organization called Call for Action. We're new. We just got our 501c3. We work with the Latinx community and this disenfranchised communities. So thank you for this workshop. It was outstanding. I would love to chat with you later to see how we can bring this into the organization that I'm in. I don't know if you do this outside, but I would love to speak to you about that. So just be on the lookout for my email. Because I really want to thank you for including all those facts about our disparities within white, being Latino, African American, or just a person of color. I think not many people talk about that, so I want to applaud you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, I will look out for your email for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. I'm glad.
Have a good night, everyone.
Yeah, you too. I will also say we have, these are some additional resources that we'll send around, some organizations that are doing really great work. The Create NYC plan, Board Source, this nourished a lot of the information you saw today. And finally, as any last questions are coming in, I do just want to invite everyone to join us for some upcoming events that are also going to be fantastic. There's CMCB Then and Now, which is a fireside chat with our executive director, past and present, David Lappin in Lacolian, Washington. That's on Thursday night, June 11th. And then this year's Fête de la Musique is going to take place online, and that'll be the afternoon of Saturday, June 30th. You can click the links over here, the bit.ly, to learn more about those things. And thank you everyone for your kind words in the chat as you are on your way out. It was great to see everyone. It sounds like we are probably wrapping up just about. Oh, yes, and thank you. That's a great point, Taniqua. So while the situations were hypothetical, the organizations that Megan and Taniqua were representing very much are not. They do amazing work in the community, and they're important partners and colleagues and friends. You can visit Dunamis Boston to learn about Dunamis, and you can, thank you, Megan, projectstep.org to learn about STEP and the great work that they do. They are very real and very great organizations to learn about and to support. Well, on that note, I think that is all. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate your little bit of extra time. As I said, please feel free to drop me a line via email if you'd like to follow up on any of this. And I look forward to seeing you all soon. There's a ton of old and new friends on this call. And so I know I didn't get to hear your voices, you just got to hear mine, but it's good to see everyone. Thank you so much.